Peace be with you. The entire human family today is confronted by one of the greatest health crises of all times. COVID-19 has killed 228,000 human beings as of the 30th of April 2020. It is also, on a worldwide scale, infected 3.21 million people. The coronavirus, which is at the root of COVID-19, is one of those viruses which has had a massive impact upon the entire human family. It has affected almost every aspect of human existence. My colleagues and I in the International Movement for a Just World have been writing about this virus and its impact upon all of us. We've produced about 6 articles so far, and we felt that perhaps one should try another medium of communication, which is why we are doing this video. Now, the video will focus upon 7 dimensions of this crisis. The first dimension, for most people today, what they really want to see is a vaccine that would be able to prevent this disease from spreading. A lot of groups in different parts of the world are working on a vaccine. Some have made more progress than others, but the conventional wisdom is that it will take something like a year to 18 months before we produce a vaccine. Now, apart from preventing the disease, there are also a lot of scientists who are working very hard on a cure. And some antiviral drugs have been produced. There is, of course, this drug that has been publicized in the last couple of days, remdesivir, which is supposed to be quite effective. If it's used in combination with other drugs, it's still experimental. These are efforts that the entire human community should support. Science is an important key in overcoming this challenge. So both a cure and a vaccine, and especially a vaccine, is something that we should work towards. We hope that neither politics nor vested interests will delay the discovery of a vaccine in particular. We're all depending upon this vaccine. Now, the second dimension, the reason why I referred to vested interests and politics is because if you look at another aspect of this crisis, which is important, how did it happen? How did it all start? You find that it has become a major issue. It is part of geopolitics. It's part of the tussle between the United States of America and China. So there's a lot of speculation, there are a lot of accusations and counter accusations and allegations that are made all the while. And to this day, we are not absolutely certain how it all started. The Americans, a lot of their interest groups and their government, they're accusing the Chinese of starting the whole thing. They say that this is because of animals, bats, but there are also people who say that this is linked to the laboratory in Wuhan laboratory which is very advanced in terms of biological experimentation. We don't know how true it is. The Chinese, on the other hand, they are saying quite openly that this was actually the Americans who started this thing, and they brought the virus to Wuhan, and some American soldiers had done this. This is linked, in their opinion, with Fort Derrick in the United States of America, which is a very well-known laboratory. There was some accident and also at the same time a deliberate attempt to spread this virus. So this is the situation at the moment, accusations and counter-accusations. And the World Health Organization, which is a body that commands a certain degree of respect and integrity, the WHO is of the opinion that it is perhaps rooted in animals, in wild animals in China. And they have done quite a bit of research. And I personally feel that one should allow the WHO to work on this, that they should be given a role in trying to establish what was the underlying cause. And many of us would listen to the WHO, even though we know that President Donald Trump of the United States has tried to discredit the WHO, which I don't think is right. So that's the second dimension which we have to look at. It is important to know how it started, because that may provide some clues on how we can handle pandemics and epidemics of this sort. But more important than finding out how it all started at this stage, I think, is how we've been handling it, that I think is very important too. So that's the third dimension. How have we been handling this crisis? There are countries that have handled the crisis quite well, a number of countries. And these are countries which have done early testing, massive testing, countries which have done contact tracing well, countries which have done shutdowns, lockdowns, and all the rest of it, countries that have controlled travel, and countries which have imposed very tight rules on interaction. And this would be countries that are very concerned about the way in which we interact with one another, and about hand sanitizers and about face masks and all the rest of it. I find that countries which have fairly good healthcare systems, countries which have a history of investing a lot of resources in healthcare, countries which have a whole history of good healthcare management, they've done fairly well. And whatever one may say about the way China handled it at the beginning, I think very quickly the Chinese managed to handle this crisis in a very effective manner. And it's because of their effective management that they managed to keep the death toll low. They managed to keep infections low. Mind you, this is a huge country of 1.4 billion people, but what they have done is really quite remarkable. South Korea has done a good job, and as we know, their mass testing was a major factor, apart from, of course, other measures that they've taken. And there are countries like Vietnam who've done a good job, Singapore in the initial stages, until, of course, the foreign workers who they neglected at the beginning, they became a major factor. Malaysia, my own country, has, I think, done a very good job in terms of handling this crisis, in terms of early measures and effective measures. And there are other countries in Southeast Asia which have done quite well. Laos is a small country, but it seems to have done very well. And I would argue that outside Southeast Asia, In India, there is Kerala, which has got a very good record. And again, like some of the other countries we mentioned, it has a remarkable track record in terms of investing in healthcare for a long while, since the mid 50s. And of course, you have outside Asia, you've got Cuba, and of course, there is Germany, which has also done a good job. I'm just mentioning some of these examples to show that there are countries that have handled this crisis fairly well. And that brings me to the fourth dimension in this presentation. There are also a lot of countries that have not done a good job. They have not done a good job. And these are countries who have not given as much attention as they should to healthcare. And countries which have emphasized privatization of healthcare, who have been more concerned about profits rather than about people, about people's health. These, I think, are the reasons why it has become quite a mess in countries like the United States of America, which has made a mess of its handling of this crisis. Britain, of course, has got a fairly decent healthcare system, but on the other hand, because of the impact of privatization and deregulation and some of the other aspects of its capitalist economy, it has, in a sense, neglected certain aspects of healthcare. And that's one of the reasons why there are such a large number of deaths in the United Kingdom, in Britain, and in certain other countries, including France and so on. So a number of European countries advanced in terms of their economy and in terms of healthcare. They don't seem to have done well in handling this crisis. And it's something that we should reflect upon. Why is this happening? Countries that are developed in the way in which the term is used, but performance has been abysmal. And this brings me to the fifth dimension in this presentation. We cannot separate the way countries are handling this crisis from the larger economy. This is something that we have to keep in mind. I find that the economic crisis that faces so many countries all over the world is one of the underlying causes of this crisis. If you have been neglecting healthcare, education, if there is a huge gap between rich and poor, you find that in a crisis like this, a lot of the poor, the powerless, they suffer. The United States is a very good example. The majority of those who have suffered, those who have died, those who have been infected, come from the poorer segment of society. And this is true of a number of other countries too. Even countries which have done fairly well, like Singapore, you look at the way in which they neglected foreign workers, and as a result of that, you find that their numbers have spiked. So the point one is making is that the economy is an important factor. And this gap between rich and poor, neglecting the poor, the powerless in society, is one of the underlying causes that we should focus upon. We should also focus upon the state of a number of economies all over the world. It's almost global now. The problem of debts, our global economy is run on the basis of debts, trillions and trillions of dollars. That's a problem. The other problem, of course, is unemployment, especially youth unemployment, which is a serious challenge. And we cannot also run away from the fact that the cost of living has been increasing in a number of countries, and that impacts upon everyone, especially the poorer segment of society. If you look at the direct link between the crisis and the economy, we know that the oil industry in the United States of America, Texas Oil, for instance, underwent a major setback. Recently, it collapsed, partly because of the crisis. Why? Because people are not traveling, people are not using cars, people are not using aeroplanes and so on. So you find that the demand for oil has really decreased significantly. And because the demand has gone down, you find that the oil industry has been very badly affected all over the world. And for the first time, I think it registered, the oil industry in the United States of America, Texas Oil in particular, negative figures. Now, this crisis in the oil industry, which is something that predated the coronavirus crisis, it predated what has been happening now, the health crisis, we cannot deny that. It is linked, of course, to shale production in the United States of America, to overproduction, to competition, and to OPEC and non-OPEC players and all the rest of it. We will not go into the details, but I think that is the backdrop. But nonetheless, it has been exacerbated by the health crisis, by the coronavirus crisis. The other crisis, which is just beginning to loom on the horizon, linked to the health crisis, but much larger, much deeper, much broader, is, of course, the crisis involving our financial system, the global financial system, the crisis linked to the US dollar. It is significant that, also just yesterday, that China decided to depeg the dollar. And this is a major event, actually. The Chinese have decided that they will not trade in the US dollar. That is the full implication of what they decided yesterday. They are, in a sense, focusing upon digital currency, the first major global economy to focus upon a digital currency. We don't know how this will play out because a lot will depend upon other countries and their response on the United States of America and how it responds to this and so on. But this is very, very important. Why? Because, as we have said very often in the past, US dominance, its hegemony, depends upon a few pillars. Apart from the military, which has not worked at all as far as its attempt to exercise its military power is concerned, it has been an utter failure, the United States of America. But apart from the military, the US dollar has been a major factor. Apart from, of course, the media and propaganda and I suppose certain other dimensions of US hegemony. But the dollar is central to imperial power. Now, that has become a major crisis now because the dollar is now facing this major challenge from the world's second biggest economy, and it's an economy that has a huge, colossal impact upon everyone. The Chinese deciding that they are going to set aside the US dollar, at least in certain areas of trade and industry. Now, this brings me to yet another dimension of the crisis. Because of what is happening to the oil market, because of what's happening to the US dollar and the global currency scenario, I wouldn't be surprised if the United States of America, which is in a total mess as a result of the health crisis, something like 60,000 people have died, more than the number of people killed in the Vietnam War, because of its inability to handle this situation. You find that the United States of America has become desperate. You can sense its desperation from the way it has been treating Iran and China. Iran, it's making a lot of noises about wanting to retaliate against Iran because of what's happening in the Persian Gulf and all that. And then, of course, China, now with this latest development involving the US currency, the dollar, and even earlier, things connected with the coronavirus crisis, China is in the crosshairs of the United States of America, and I wouldn't be surprised if they attempt to provoke China. In other words, both Iran and China, they may be targets of the United States of America. In other words, it's quite possible that they may decide to go to war. There may be a war as a result of what is happening, a major global war, which I would attribute to the United States of America and its desperation. Its attempt to divert attention on the one hand, and at the same time, its attempt to perhaps to restore the oil market, because if there is a war in the Persian Gulf, maybe oil prices will go up. And in the case of China, well, targeting China, because China has proven to be a challenge that they cannot manage. So war is not inconceivable. And let's not forget that the United States of America, like some of the other Western countries, but especially the United States of America in recent times, has been very, very inclined towards war. Look at the wars that they have participated in, that they've initiated. Apart from Korea, there's Vietnam, there is Iraq, there is Libya, there is Syria. They've gone to war with so much enthusiasm. I mean, this is part of their DNA, going to war. And this is my great fear, that this may also happen as a result of this crisis, because the health crisis impacts upon every American, and it impacts upon the whole world. People can see it in terms of their own lives and their own well-being. So trying to manipulate the situation and create a war, that's not something which we should dismiss lightly. It can happen. Now, if one looks at the United States of America, apart from its history, its DNA, as far as war is concerned, let's not forget that the United States of America spends a huge amount of its budget on war. In 2018, for instance, $649 billion. That's what the US spent that year on the military, its military expenditure. The biggest chunk, as far as any country is concerned, the world as a whole spent 1.8 trillion, but you can see what a big chunk the US military budget is in that total global budget. And the US has been doing this for a long, long while. Its weapons, its military bases, it has got perhaps, including drone bases, 1,000 bases all around the world. And this is the US. It is basically a very military-centered, war-oriented economy, a war-oriented, military-centered nation. So friends, there is this danger. And if you compare how much it spends upon the military and its military expenditure to health care, you see the stark contrast. I was amazed to read in an American magazine the other day that what the United States spends in 1 year on nuclear weapons, just 1 year, mind you, on nuclear weapons, that amount that it spends on nuclear weapons would be enough to maintain 300,000 ICU beds, intensive care unit beds. It would be enough to maintain something like 35,000 ventilators, to purchase and maintain 35,000 ventilators. It would be more than enough to pay for 75,000 doctors. So you see the huge contrast. The US doesn't spend that sort of money on all these things, on doctors, on ventilators, on ICU beds, and so on. Instead, it spends on nuclear weapons, on military hardware, on bases, on its military personnel. And this is why, friends, we have to ask some searching questions. If we continue along this path, emphasis upon the wrong things, we get our priorities wrong. The emphasis is upon the military, upon going to war, killing people. If we continue with this, the only future for the whole of humankind, for our children and our grandchildren and the people who will come after them, is just bloodshed and chaos, turmoil. We will not have a peaceful world. We will not be able to look after the millions and millions of people who need to be protected and whose interests need to be enhanced. Which is why I think we have to take a different path. Which is the reason why I feel that this coronavirus crisis is perhaps an opportunity for us to pause and ponder. And I'm making that plea. Let's pause and ponder. Whatever the underlying causes of the virus, let us seize this opportunity to pause and ponder. Do we want to pursue this path, or do we want to pursue another path? Move away from this destruction, move away from this utterly inhuman, unjust, iniquitous path that the world has chosen, led by powerful vested interests. Let's choose another path. And this would mean, for instance, instead of spending on the military and on killing people, we would spend on the things that matter to our people. We would spend on homes, on schools, on hospitals, on developing infrastructure, roads and canals and ports, and we would spend on developing our technologies that benefit people, including, of course, the new communication technologies and all the rest of it. But these are things that benefit people. That's what we would spend on. We would change our orientation completely, rather than continue along the path that we have pursued for a few decades now. It is not just in terms of infrastructure development. We have to pay very close attention to closing the gap between the rich and poor. That I think is fundamental. It is fundamental because it is one of the reasons why our economies are not strong. It's because of this gap between the rich and poor. It's one of the reasons why a health crisis takes this particular form, because of the gap between the rich and poor. So we have to pay attention to this vital question, the problem of the increasing gap between rich and poor. And this also means, and this brings me to yet another dimension of what we are talking about, I think it also means that we should pay closer attention to relationships, because when you look after the poor in society, you are actually paying attention to the whole question of relationships between human beings. In other words, those who have more are prepared to take care of those who have less. They understand the importance of that sort of relationship. And relationships are very important within the family, within the community, within a nation, within the larger world. Relationships involving people who are not like us, who are different from us, whether it's in socioeconomic terms or in sociocultural, socioethnic terms. We have to think of everyone. We have to think of ourselves as a single family. It's so important. And I feel that this is something that has to be emphasized over and over again, especially because of what has happened in recent years. Look at the way Europe has treated refugees and migrants. These are also human beings, but look at the way they have been treated. And look at the way other countries, not just countries in Europe, have treated people. Even within their own society, people are different. The way we treat people are different. The way we emphasize ethnic differences, religious differences, the way we exploit these differences, the way we discriminate against human beings, this is wrong. And one must also add gender discrimination as part of this type of discrimination that is happening, and discrimination of people who are different in whatever sense. Friends, that's another important dimension of our challenge. And I would add yet another dimension to this challenge, apart from relationships, apart from the economy and infrastructure and so on. I think it is so important for us to pay attention to nature and to the environment. We are part of it. It is us. The environment is so integral to our existence. And one of the reasons why this crisis may have happened is because we haven't paid enough attention to the environment, to animals, to the vegetation, plants, to the natural environment. And infectious diseases are linked to the environment. And if this crisis, the coronavirus crisis, is linked to infectious diseases and to the environment, this is a reminder to us that we should pay attention to the environment. We should live in harmony with the environment. We should not ravage and rape the environment. Just think of our own selfish interests. In other words, we destroy the environment because we are just thinking of profits of our own very narrow interests, which has dominated thinking about the economy, about development and so on for so long. We have to get rid of that sort of thinking. Living in harmony with the environment is so vital. In fact, the whole question of the environment, just like relationships in society, these are all very much part of our religious teachings. Just like equity, justice, redistribution of wealth is all very much part of our spiritual, moral heritage. And we have to return to that. We have to reconnect with our spiritual and moral heritage. These are the values that should inform us and inspire us. We have set them aside, which is one of the reasons why we are in this crisis. And setting them aside, and this is the last dimension that I want to emphasize, is linked to the way in which we have forgotten who we are and what our role is. Why are we here? What is our position as human beings? What is it to be human, to be a human being? I think that is the vital question, because that's related to the environment, the natural environment. It's related to relationships, it's related to justice, equity, and the redistribution of wealth and all the rest of it. So let us rediscover ourselves, who we are, why we are here, what is our purpose, what is the purpose of human existence. In a sense, this crisis involving a life form that is not even a life form in the real sense, a virus, perhaps it's a reminder to us. It is an attempt to tell us that don't forget who you are. Remember who you are and why you are here. It is not just to make money, to accumulate wealth, to accumulate riches, to accumulate power. That's not the purpose of human existence. It is something else. It's much deeper. It's more profound. It is to be genuinely human, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be caring, to be able to show that we value the whole purpose of our existence, why we are here, what all the great spiritual traditions tell us. That is the real purpose. So it is returning to that message that is vital. That is the plea. That is what I see this crisis as. And many others have also said the same thing. I just want to reinforce this, and I want to reinforce it by linking it with the socioeconomic, socio-political, socio-cultural challenges that confront us. Because the spiritual is, in the ultimate analysis, deeply interwoven, intertwined with all these challenges. So let us face this challenge and come out of this once this lockdown is over, once we have returned to normal. Let us understand that we cannot continue to do what we have done in the past. That is over. We have to be different. We have to be truly human. We have to be truly just. We have to be truly compassionate. We have to once again connect with that eternal wisdom, that perennial truth, which is what human existence, which is what human life is all about. Thank you.